Hello everyone. Tonight, imagine living in a quiet medieval village where the streets grow dark before sunset. And every person has a job that might sound almost unbelievable today. There were people whose entire job was waking villagers by tapping on their windows, others who cleaned waste from deep pits in the middle of the night, and even people who were paid to take the sins of the dead. These strange and forgotten jobs quietly kept medieval villages alive in ways most history books never mention. So dim the lights, relax your mind, and let's slowly travel back in time to discover the weird jobs people once had in medieval villages. Life in medieval villages was far more complex than many people imagine. When we think about the Middle Ages, we often picture farmers working the fields, blacksmiths hammering metal, and lords ruling from distant castles. But beneath this simple image existed a surprisingly strange world of unusual occupations that were essential for daily life. Medieval villages functioned like small ecosystems where every task, no matter how odd it might seem today, had someone responsible for performing it. Because technology was limited and sanitation systems barely existed, communities relied on specialized workers to handle tasks that modern societies solve with machines, plumbing, and organized services. These jobs were often dirty, dangerous, or socially awkward. Yet they were vital to the survival of the village. One of the strangest and least glamorous occupations was that of the gong farmer. Despite the humorous name, this job involved cleaning human waste from latrines and cesspits. Medieval villages did not have modern sewage systems, so waste accumulated in pits beneath toilets or in shared cesspools. When these pits filled up, the gong farmer would be called in, usually at night, to shovel out the foul, smelling contents and transport them outside the village. The work was disgusting and hazardous because the gases produced by decomposing waste could suffocate workers, and disease was always a risk. Yet this unpleasant job was incredibly important for maintaining public hygiene and preventing the spread of illness. Without gong farmers, villages could quickly become overwhelmed by waste. Another unusual occupation was the sin eater, a figure surrounded by mystery and superstition. In certain regions, especially in parts of England and Wales, villagers believed that a dead person's sins could be transferred to another individual through a ritual meal. The sin eater would be invited to the house of the deceased, where bread and ale were placed on the corpse's chest. The sin eater would consume the food, symbolically absorbing the sins of the dead person so their soul could pass peacefully into the afterlife. This job was both feared and pitied. People believed the sin eater carried the spiritual burden of many souls, so they were often avoided socially and lived on the margins of society. Despite this stigma, families sometimes paid them small amounts of money or food, making it a grim but necessary role in communities deeply influenced by religious belief. In the busy streets of medieval towns and larger villages, another peculiar job belonged to the knocker. Up long before alarm clocks existed, workers relied on someone to wake them in the early morning hours. The knocker would walk through the streets, carrying a long stick or pole, and tap on the windows of customers until they woke up. In some places, they used pea shooters to gently knock on upper floor windows. This job required reliability and patience, because oversleeping could mean missed work for many villagers. Though it might sound simple, The responsibility was significant in communities where daily labor began at sunrise, and punctuality was essential for survival. Then there was the rat catcher, a job that was both necessary and dangerous. Rats were a constant threat in medieval villages because they spread disease and destroyed food supplies. Rat catchers were responsible for trapping or killing these pests in homes, granaries, and marketplaces. Some used trained dogs or ferrets, while others relied on clever traps and poisons. The job required courage and persistence because rats could bite and carry deadly illnesses. Yet successful rat catchers earned respect because they helped protect communities from infestations that could devastate food storage and health. Another strange occupation involved the role of the town crier. Before newspapers, radios, or public announcement systems existed, villages depended on town criers to deliver important news. The town crier would walk through streets, ringing a bell and shouting announcements, so that everyone could hear them. These announcements might include royal decrees, tax notices, upcoming markets, or warnings about criminals and fires. The phrase, hear ye," became closely associated with this role. Town criers needed strong voices and good memory, since they were responsible for accurately communicating official information to the entire community. Medieval villages also had people known as leech collectors. In medieval medicine, doctors believed that bloodletting could cure many illnesses. Leeches were used to draw blood from patients in a controlled way, so physicians needed a steady supply of them. Leech collectors would wade into marshes and ponds, allowing leeches to attach themselves to their legs. After collecting enough, they carefully removed them and sold them to healers and barber surgeons. This job was uncomfortable and sometimes painful, but it was an important part of the medical practices of the time. Another unusual profession was the fuller, someone responsible for cleaning and thickening wool cloth. After wool was woven into fabric, it still contained oils, dirt, and impurities. Fullers cleaned the cloth by soaking it in a mixture that often included water, clay, and surprisingly, human urine. Urine contains ammonia, which helped remove grease and whiten the fabric. Workers would stomp on the cloth in vats to mix the solution thoroughly. Though effective, the process produced strong smells, and fullers often worked on the outskirts of villages to avoid disturbing others. Medieval communities also relied on a person known as the night soil collector, similar to gong farmers, but sometimes operating on a larger scale. These workers gathered waste from households and transported it outside the town to be used as fertilizer. Farmers valued this material because it enriched soil and improved crop yields. While the work was unpleasant, it connected sanitation with agriculture in a cycle that helped sustain food production. Another odd but important job was that of the ale taster or ale conner. Ale was one of the most common drinks in medieval villages because clean drinking water was not always available. However, poor quality ale could make people sick or indicate cheating by brewers. The ale conner's job was to inspect and taste ale to ensure it met acceptable standards. In some traditions, the ale conner would pour ale onto a wooden bench and sit on it while wearing leather pants. If the ale was too sugary or sticky and caused the pants to stick to the bench when standing up, it indicated improper brewing methods. This strange test helped maintain quality and fairness in local markets. Some villages also had a professional known as the fluffer or bellman, who assisted with public events, announcements, and ceremonies. Their role often involved ringing bells at certain times of the day to signal curfews, church gatherings, or emergencies. These signals helped organize daily life in communities where most people did not own clocks. In agricultural regions, there were also specialized workers known as swineherds, who managed pigs belonging to multiple villages. Pigs were allowed to roam forests and fields in search of food, so swineherds guided and protected them during the day. They also had to identify which pigs belonged to which families, often using unique ear markings. Even entertainment had unusual jobs. Traveling performers, jesters, and storytellers sometimes visited villages to perform music, juggling, or humorous acts during festivals and market days. Though they were not permanent residents, they played a valuable role in bringing joy and distraction to communities whose daily lives were filled with hard labor. One particularly strange role involved the position of a taster for noble households. Because poisoning was a real fear among wealthy families and local lords, food tasters sampled meals before they were served to ensure they were safe. While this job offered access to high-status households, it also carried obvious risks if someone attempted to poison the food. Another unusual occupation involved maintaining the stocks and pillories used for public punishment. The person responsible ensured these wooden devices were ready for offenders who had committed minor crimes. Though not always a full-time job, someone in the village had to maintain the equipment and supervise its use during punishments. In coastal or riverside villages, there were also mudlarks who searched riverbanks for useful objects, lost or discarded in the water. These individuals combed muddy shores looking for coins, nails, rope, or other items that could be reused or sold. These strange occupations remind us that medieval villages were far from simple places. They were communities built on cooperation and necessity, where every job contributed to survival in a challenging environment. Many of these roles existed because technology had not yet solved problems that modern societies handle easily, such as waste disposal, pest control, communication, and sanitation. Although some of these jobs may sound bizarre or unpleasant today, they were essential parts of everyday life in the Middle Ages. Without the gong farmer cleaning cesspits, the rat catcher controlling pests, the town crier spreading news, or the leech collector supplying medicine, medieval villages could not function effectively. These workers formed an invisible network of services that kept communities running long before modern infrastructure existed, proving that even the strangest jobs can play an important role in the survival of society. Medieval villages were full of unusual and often overlooked occupations that existed because everyday life required solutions to problems that modern technology has since eliminated. Beyond the more commonly known trades like blacksmiths, farmers, and carpenters, there were many strange and highly specialized jobs that villagers relied on to keep their communities functioning. These roles often involved tasks that were uncomfortable, dangerous, or socially awkward. Yet they were essential in maintaining order, sanitation, safety, and even superstition in medieval life. The people who performed these jobs rarely received recognition, but without them village life would have quickly fallen into chaos. One such unusual job was that of the scavenger. Despite what the modern word suggests, medieval scavengers were actually officials responsible for keeping streets clean. Villages and towns had no organized garbage collection system, so waste often accumulated in streets, markets, and alleyways. The scavengers' responsibility was to ensure that residents kept their surroundings relatively clean, and that garbage was removed from public areas. In some places they supervised labourers who collected refuse, animal waste, and spoiled food, and transported it outside the settlement. Their job was unpleasant, but extremely important in reducing disease and maintaining basic hygiene. Another strange occupation involved the role of the dung collector. While it may sound absurd today, animal dung was actually a valuable resource during the Middle Ages. Farmers used it as fertilizer, and in some cases it was used in fuel production, or even in certain industrial processes like tanning leather. Dung collectors walked through streets and fields gathering manure left behind by horses, cows, and other livestock. They stored it and sold it to farmers who needed it to enrich their soil, because animals moved freely through villages. Dung collection was a daily necessity. There were also people known as tanners, whose job was to convert animal hides into usable leather. Although tanning might not sound unusual at first, the process itself was incredibly unpleasant. Hides had to be soaked in mixtures containing water, lime, and sometimes animal brains or urine to remove hair and soften the material. In some stages of tanning, workers used fermented animal dung to treat the hides. Because of the intense smell and the chemical reactions involved, tanning workshops were usually located far from the center of villages. Tanners often had stained hands and clothes, and their work environment was harsh. But leather was essential for clothing, shoes, armor, belts, and tools. Another fascinating medieval occupation was the lamp lighter. In larger towns and some villages, streets were lit with oil lamps or lanterns placed on posts. The lamplighter walked through the settlement each evening, lighting these lamps, and then returned early in the morning to extinguish them. Although this job became more common in later centuries, early forms existed in medieval settlements, where local authorities attempted to provide some nighttime visibility. The lamplighter helped reduce accidents and crime during dark evenings. The job of the reeve was another important yet unusual position within the village hierarchy. The reeve acted as a kind of local manager for the lord of the manor. This person supervised farming activities, collected rents, organized labor, and ensured that peasants fulfilled their obligations to the lord. The reeve was often chosen from among the villagers themselves, which could create tension because they had to enforce rules on neighbors and friends. Although the job carried authority, it also came with pressure and responsibility. Another odd profession involved the charcoal burner. Charcoal was a crucial fuel for blacksmiths and metalworkers, because it burned hotter and cleaner than ordinary wood. Charcoal burners worked in forests, carefully stacking wood in large piles and slowly burning it under controlled conditions to produce charcoal. The process required constant attention and could take several days. These workers often lived temporarily in forest camps while monitoring the slow-burning piles. Although isolated and physically demanding, their work supplied the fuel that powered medieval metalworking. Medieval villages also relied on individuals known as fletchers. These craftsmen specialized in making arrows, which were essential for hunting and warfare. While archers are often remembered in medieval stories, The fletchers who produced thousands of arrows rarely receive attention. They carefully attached feathers to arrow shafts to ensure stable flight. This delicate work required precision, and experienced fletchers were highly valued, especially during times of conflict. Another unusual role was that of the pardoner. Pardoners travelled from place to place selling indulgences, which were official documents from the church claiming to reduce punishment for sins. While the church authorized some pardoners, others became infamous for exploiting people's fears and religious beliefs. They often displayed supposed holy relics and promised spiritual benefits in exchange for money. Many villagers were skeptical, but others believed these transactions could help secure their place in heaven. The occupation of the miller might seem ordinary at first, but millers held a unique and sometimes controversial position in medieval communities. Villagers brought their grain to the miller to be ground into flour using large water-powered or wind-powered mills. The miller typically kept a portion of the grain as payment. Because most villagers could not measure grain precisely, some millers gained reputations for secretly taking more than their share. Despite this suspicion, mills were essential for turning grain into usable flour for bread. Another strange job involved the dog whipper, a position found especially in churches. Dogs often followed their owners into church buildings, which could disrupt services. The dog whipper's job was to keep animals out or chase them away during gatherings. They carried a whip or staff and quietly ensured that services continued without disturbance. Medieval communities also had individuals responsible for maintaining communal ovens. Because building a personal oven was expensive, many villagers baked bread in shared ovens operated by specialists. These oven keepers regulated baking schedules and ensured that fires were properly maintained so multiple families could bake their loaves. In agricultural villages, there were workers known as haywards. Their job was to protect crops and fields from wandering livestock. Animals like pigs, cows, and sheep could easily destroy crops if left unchecked. The hayward patrolled farmland and ensured animals stayed within designated areas. Another unusual profession involved falconers. Falcons and hawks were trained for hunting small animals and birds. Falconers cared for these birds, trained them, and accompanied nobles during hunting trips. The relationship between falconer and bird required patience and skill, making it a respected though specialized occupation. Some medieval villages also had individuals known as bell ringers. Bells played a vital role in daily life, signaling time, church services, emergencies, and even approaching storms. Bell ringers had to follow strict schedules and ensure the community was alerted at the right moments. There were also bridge keepers, responsible for maintaining wooden bridges that allowed villagers to cross rivers safely. Bridges could deteriorate quickly due to weather and heavy use, so constant repair was necessary to prevent accidents. Another curious job involved the water carrier. In villages where wells were scarce or located far from homes, water carriers transported water in large buckets or barrels to households that needed it. This job required strength and endurance, as water had to be delivered daily. Medieval life also included the role of the executioner, although this position was more common in towns than small villages. Executioners carried out legal punishments, such as hangings or beheadings. Despite their role in law enforcement, they were often socially isolated because people feared or avoided them. A more unusual occupation was the rag collector. Old cloth and fabric scraps were valuable materials used in papermaking and textile recycling. Rag collectors gathered discarded fabric from households and sold it to craftsmen who reused the fibers. All of these strange and specialized occupations show how medieval villages operated through a network of people performing tasks that modern technology has largely replaced. Sanitation, food preparation, communication, law enforcement, medicine, and agriculture all required human labor and specialized knowledge. While some of these jobs might seem bizarre today, they played an essential role in sustaining communities during a time when survival depended on cooperation and practical skills. Medieval villages were not just simple farming communities, but complex societies, where even the most unusual professions had an important purpose in maintaining everyday life. Life in medieval villages depended on an incredible variety of small and specialized occupations that many people today would find strange or surprising. These communities functioned without modern infrastructure, so almost every problem had to be solved by a person performing a specific task. As a result, villages developed unusual jobs that were created out of necessity, tradition, or superstition. These roles might seem odd to modern readers, but each one played a part in keeping the fragile balance of medieval society running smoothly. Unusual job found in many villages was the role of the grave digger fay, though it was very different from what we imagine today. In medieval times, death was common due to disease, accidents, and poor medical knowledge. Gravediggers were responsible not only for digging burial pits, but also for maintaining churchyards, and sometimes even handling bodies during outbreaks of plague or illness. Because graves were often reused due to limited space, gravediggers sometimes had to move older bones aside to make room for new burials. This could be disturbing work, and people often viewed grave diggers with a mixture of respect and unease. Another peculiar occupation was that of the Fay-Herbib wife, Fay or village healer. These individuals, often older women, possessed knowledge of plants and herbs used for remedies. While some treatments were effective, many were based on traditional beliefs or superstition. Herb wives created mixtures for headaches, wounds, fevers, and stomach problems. However, their knowledge sometimes made others suspicious, especially during times when fear of witchcraft spread through communities. Despite these suspicions, villagers frequently relied on their healing skills. When professional physicians were too expensive or far away, villages also had people who worked as Fay hedge wardens Fay. Their responsibility was to maintain the hedges that surrounded fields and roads. Hedges acted as natural fences, preventing animals from wandering into crops and protecting farmland from wind damage. The hedge warden inspected these barriers and ensured they were properly trimmed and repaired. Though it sounds simple, this role was crucial for protecting valuable farmland. Another strange occupation was that of the face cutter Fay in colder regions. During winter, workers would cut blocks of ice from frozen lakes and rivers and store them in underground ice houses. These ice blocks could last for months and were used to preserve food or cool drinks during warmer seasons. The job required strength and precision because large ice blocks were heavy and slippery. Medieval villages also relied on chimney sweeps Fay, although the profession became more organized in later centuries. In villages with larger houses or manor buildings, Chimneys could become clogged with soot and debris. Chimney sweeps climbed inside narrow chimneys to remove build-up that could cause dangerous fires. This work was dirty and hazardous because inhaling soot could cause serious health problems. Another interesting job was the fey rope maker fey, also known as a rope maker or roper. Rope was essential for agriculture, construction, fishing, and transportation. Rope makers twisted fibers from hemp or other plants into long strands, then carefully combined them into strong ropes. Because ropes had to be produced in long straight lines, rope makers often worked in special long pathways called rope walks. In villages near forests, there were workers known as fey woodwardens. Their responsibility was to protect forest resources that belonged to the lord of the manor. Villagers were sometimes allowed to collect fallen branches for firewood or allow pigs to forage for acorns. But strict rules controlled these activities. The woodwarden ensured no one cut down valuable trees without permission. Another unusual role was that of the Fey Watchman Fey. Because medieval villages had little organized policing, watchmen guarded streets at night. They carried lanterns or torches and patrolled the village to look for suspicious activity, fires, or disturbances. If danger appeared, they would alert villagers by shouting or ringing bells. Villages also had workers known as fey basket makers fey. While this might seem ordinary today, baskets were incredibly important in medieval life. They were used for carrying crops, transporting goods, storing food, and even fishing. Basket makers carefully wove flexible branches such as willow into strong containers. Their craftsmanship allowed villagers to store and move essential supplies. Another fascinating occupation involved fey shearers, fey people who removed wool from sheep during the warmer months. Shearing required skill because cutting the wool incorrectly could injure the sheep or damage the valuable fleece. Wool was one of the most important materials in medieval Europe, so skilled shearers were highly valued. There were also fey potters fey, craftsmen who shaped clay into useful household items, such as bowls, jars, and cooking pots. Pottery was essential because metal containers were expensive and wooden containers could rot. Potters worked with simple wheels and clay ovens, producing durable items that every household needed. Another unusual profession was the fey beadle fey, a minor village official who assisted church authorities. The beadle ensured order during church services, helped maintain church property, and sometimes delivered messages or announcements. Some villages also employed a fey shepherd fey, though in medieval times this role often required watching flocks belonging to multiple families. Shepherds spent long hours in fields guiding sheep, protecting them from predators, and ensuring they grazed safely. They often lived simple and isolated lives while tending their flocks. Another curious job was that of the fey torch bearer fey. During festivals, ceremonies, or nighttime events, torch bearers carried large burning torches to illuminate paths and public spaces. Before street lighting became common, these individuals helped guide people safely in the dark. Medieval markets also depended on fey wagers, fey individuals responsible for ensuring goods were measured fairly. Dishonest traders sometimes used false weights, so wagers checked scales to maintain fairness in trade. Another strange but practical occupation was the fey fish pond keeper fey. Many villages maintained fish ponds to ensure a steady supply of fish. especially because religious fasting days often prohibited eating meat. The pond keeper monitored water levels, protected fish from predators, and managed harvesting. There were also fey tile makers who produced clay tiles used in roofing. These tiles protected houses from rain and weather damage. Tile making required carefully shaping clay and baking it in kilns. Some villages had messengers who travelled between settlements delivering letters or news. Because long-distance communication was slow, messengers played an important role in maintaining connections between communities. Another unusual profession involved wax chandlers, people who produced candles. Candles were the main source of indoor lighting after sunset. Wax chandlers melted beeswax or animal fat and shaped it into candles used in homes, churches, and workshops. There were also locksmiths, craftsmen who produced metal locks and keys to secure homes, chests, and storage areas. Although many medieval houses were simple, protecting valuables was still important. One particularly interesting role was that of the storyteller or bard fee. These individuals entertained villagers by telling tales of heroes, legends, and historical events. Storytelling served as both entertainment and a way of preserving cultural traditions. Finally, some villages had weather watchers, experienced farmers or elders who observed patterns in clouds, winds, and animal behavior to predict upcoming weather. Accurate predictions were important because planting and harvesting depended heavily on seasonal conditions. When we look closely at these occupations, it becomes clear that medieval villages were filled with people performing highly specific tasks that modern technology has largely replaced. From grave diggers and herb healers to rope makers and watchmen, each role contributed to the survival and organization of the community. Life in medieval times required cooperation, skill, and adaptation. And even the strangest jobs were valuable pieces of a system that allowed villages to function long before modern conveniences existed. Medieval villages depended on a surprising network of strange and highly specialized occupations that modern society has almost completely forgotten. These communities were small and self-sufficient, meaning nearly every need had to be handled by someone within the village itself. Without modern infrastructure, machines, or organized services, many daily tasks required human labor in ways that might seem unusual today. As a result, villagers created jobs that were sometimes dirty, sometimes dangerous, and sometimes simply strange. Yet these occupations were essential in keeping life functioning smoothly. One curious job in medieval villages was that of the Feywell keeper. Water was one of the most valuable resources in any settlement, and many villages relied on a single communal well. The well keeper maintained the structure, ensured the water remained clean, and sometimes controlled access during times of shortage. If a well became contaminated, entire communities could become sick. Because of this, the well keeper carried significant responsibility. They often inspected the well daily, removed debris, and ensured the rope and bucket systems worked properly. Another unusual role was that of the Fey gatekeeper. Some villages were surrounded by wooden palisades or simple defensive walls to protect against thieves or wandering soldiers. These settlements had gates that were closed. Medieval villages were complex systems where survival depended on many small and highly specialized tasks. Because technology was extremely limited, almost every daily activity required human effort and organization. Over time, this created a wide variety of unusual occupations that might sound strange today, but were completely normal in medieval society. Villagers depended on these workers for food, safety, communication, and maintaining order in a world where even simple tasks could become difficult without the right skills. One unusual occupation was that of the Fey-well ropemaker Fey. While rope making existed as a broader trade, some villages had individuals who specialized specifically in creating strong ropes used for drawing water from wells. These ropes had to withstand constant friction against stone surfaces and heavy buckets of water. If a rope snapped, the bucket could fall into the well and become very difficult to retrieve. Because wells were essential for survival, maintaining strong ropes was extremely important. Another strange but necessary job was the Fey bucket mender. Fey wooden buckets were used constantly in medieval villages for carrying water, milk, grain, and many other materials. Over time, the wooden staves and metal bands would loosen or crack. The bucket mender repaired these containers, replacing broken pieces and tightening the metal hoops so they would hold water properly again. Some villages also had fake lantern carriers Fey, especially during nighttime gatherings or when important visitors arrived. Before organized street lighting existed, lantern carriers walked ahead of travelers or officials to illuminate the path. This role was common during religious processions, festivals, or when local authorities traveled through the village after sunset. Another curious job was that of the Fey pond cleaner Fey. Many villages relied on ponds for washing clothes, watering animals, and sometimes even as backup water sources. Over time, these ponds could become clogged with plants, mud, and debris. Pond cleaners removed excess vegetation and maintained the pond so it remained usable. Villages also depended on Fey grain threshers Fey, workers who separated edible grain from the stalks of harvested crops. After wheat or barley was cut, threshers beat the stalks with wooden flails to loosen the grains. This process required skill and stamina, because it had to be done carefully to avoid damaging the grain. Another interesting occupation was the Feastable cleaner Fey. Horses, oxen, and other livestock were kept in communal stables in some villages. These animals produced large amounts of manure and waste that had to be cleaned regularly. Stable cleaners removed the waste, replaced straw bedding, and ensured the animals had clean environments. Some medieval villages had Feybridge watchers Fey, individuals who monitored bridges during times of flooding. Heavy rain could cause rivers to rise quickly, damaging wooden bridges or washing them away. The bridge watcher inspected structures and warned villagers if crossing became dangerous. Another unusual job involved Fey barrel rollers Fey. Barrels were one of the most common storage containers used for transporting wine, beer, salted fish, and other goods. Barrel rollers moved these heavy containers between storage areas, markets, and carts. The work required strength and coordination, because barrels could be extremely heavy when full. Villages also relied on Fey market sweepers. Fey marketplaces were busy areas where food, animals, and goods were sold. After market days, the ground would often be covered in scraps, spoiled food, and animal waste. Sweepers cleaned the area so it would be ready for the next gathering. Another strange occupation was that of the Fay bellows operator. Fay in blacksmith workshops. Blacksmiths needed extremely hot fires to shape metal. Bellows operators pumped large airbags that forced oxygen into the furnace, making the fire burn hotter. This job required continuous effort, sometimes for hours at a time. Some villages had Fay grain measurers Fay, people responsible for measuring grain during trade, to ensure fairness between buyers and sellers. Because standardized measuring tools were limited, experienced measurers helped prevent disputes. Another interesting profession was the Fay ladder maker Fay. Ladders were necessary for building houses, repairing roofs, and harvesting fruit from tall trees. Ladder makers constructed sturdy wooden ladders that could support workers safely. Medieval communities also depended on Feyre thatchers Fey, craftsmen who built roofs using bundles of straw or reeds. Thatch roofs were common because they provided good insulation and were made from easily available materials. However, they required regular maintenance to prevent leaks. Another unusual job was that of the Fey animal tracker Fey. When livestock wandered away or were stolen, trackers followed footprints and signs to locate them. This skill required careful observation of the ground and environment. Villages also relied on Fey cart path maintainers. Fey dirt roads quickly developed deep ruts from wagon wheels, especially after rain. Path maintainers filled these ruts with stones or soil to keep roads usable. Another curious occupation was the Fey grain dryer Fey. After harvest, grain often contained moisture that could cause it to rot during storage. Grain dryers spread the grain out and monitored it carefully until it was dry enough to store safely. Some villages had Fey fish smokers Fey, individuals who preserved fish by drying and smoking it over slow fires. This method allowed fish to be stored for long periods and transported to other markets. Another unusual role was the Fey sheep counter Fey. Light flocks often belonged to multiple families, so someone had to keep track of how many animals each person owned. Counting sheep helped prevent disputes and ensured fair distribution of wool or meat. Villages sometimes employed festival fire builders Fey, people responsible for constructing large bonfires during celebrations. These fires were used during seasonal festivals, religious events, or communal gatherings. Another strange job was the Fey clay digger Fey, who collected clay from riverbanks for potters and builders. Clay was an essential material for making pottery, bricks, and tiles. Medieval communities also had Fey grain sack stitchers Fey. Grain was transported and stored in cloth sacks, which could tear after heavy use. Stitchers repaired these sacks so they could be reused. Another fascinating occupation was the Fey bird trapper Fey, who caught birds for food or feathers. Birds such as pigeons, ducks, and quail were valuable sources of meat. Some villages had Fey torch makers Fey, individuals who produced torches used during nighttime travel or celebrations. Torches were made by wrapping cloth around wooden sticks and soaking them in animal fat or resin. Another unusual role involved Fey herd callers Fey, people who used whistles or horns to guide animals back toward villages. At the end of the day, farmers often allowed animals to graze in open areas, so herd callers helped gather them before nightfall. Villages also depended on Fey grain grinders Fey, who operated smaller hand mills, when larger mills were unavailable. Families sometimes brought grain to these workers to grind small quantities into flour. Another strange occupation was the Fey road marker keeper Fey, responsible for maintaining wooden posts or stones that guided travellers along major routes between villages. Some medieval settlements also had Fey storm watchers Fey, individuals who observed weather conditions and warned farmers if severe storms approached. Another interesting profession was the Fey wax seal maker Fey, who produced wax used to seal letters and official documents. These seals ensured that messages had not been opened or altered. Villages also had Fey tool sharpeners, Fey craftsmen who sharpened knives, axes, and farming tools. Sharp tools made work easier and safer for farmers and craftsmen. Finally, there were fistery carriers, Fey travellers who moved between villages sharing news, rumours, and tales from distant places. In a time without newspapers or fast communication, these individuals helped spread knowledge and stories from one community to another. These many strange occupations demonstrate how medieval villages relied on countless small roles to survive and function. Every aspect of daily life, from maintaining roads and wells to preserving food and organizing markets, required skilled workers who understood their tasks. While modern technology has replaced most of these jobs, they reveal how resourceful and cooperative medieval communities had to be in order to survive in a challenging and unpredictable world. Medieval villages were filled with many more unusual and highly specialized occupations that modern society has largely forgotten, because life depended heavily on manual labor and community cooperation. People often developed unique roles to solve specific everyday problems. These jobs might sound strange today, but in the medieval world they were practical and necessary. Every small responsibility in the village, from maintaining tools to protecting crops, could become a profession for someone. An unusual occupation was the Fey bellows maker Fey. While blacksmiths used bellows to pump air into their furnaces, someone had to manufacture these large leather air bags. Bellows makers crafted them from wood and animal hide, ensuring they could push strong bursts of air into the fire without leaking. Without properly working bellows, blacksmiths could not reach the temperatures required to shape iron or steel. Another curious job was the Feyplow repairer. Farming tools were used constantly, and wooden ploughs often broke or wore down while working in rocky soil. The plough repairer specialized in fixing these tools by replacing broken beams or reinforcing metal blades, because ploughing was essential for planting. Medieval villages contained even more unusual occupations that developed out of everyday necessity. Because technology was limited and communities depended heavily on manual labor, many small responsibilities turned into dedicated roles. These jobs might seem strange or overly specific today, but in the medieval world every task mattered. If even one small job was neglected, it could affect food supplies, sanitation, safety, or trade within the village. One such unusual occupation was the Fey well bucket maker Fey. Since wells were the main source of water in many villages, strong wooden buckets were required to draw water repeatedly throughout the day. These buckets had to be carefully crafted so they would not leak or break while being lowered deep into wells. The bucket maker shaped wooden staves, bound them with metal hoops, and sometimes reinforced them with leather. Another curious job was that of the Fey grain scoop maker Fey. Villagers constantly handled grain during harvest, storage, and milling. Wooden scoops were used to measure and transfer grain between containers. Craftsmen carved these scoops from wood so that farmers and millers could move grain quickly without spilling it. Some villages also had fay cartwheel testers, fay. After wheels were built or repaired, someone needed to check that they rolled properly and could support heavy loads. Wheel testers rolled carts across uneven ground to ensure the wheels were strong enough for long journeys between villages and markets. Another unusual occupation was the thatch inspector fay. Because thatched roofs were common, villages sometimes appointed individuals to inspect them periodically. A damaged thatch roof could leak water into homes or even catch fire easily if it became too dry. Inspectors checked roofs for weak areas and advised homeowners when repairs were needed. Medieval communities also relied on fay smoke vent cleaners. Fay in houses without proper chimneys, smoke escaped through small roof openings. Over time, these vents could become blocked with soot or debris. Cleaners removed build-up, so smoke could escape properly, preventing dangerous indoor air conditions. Another strange job involved fay grain bag sealers fay. Once grain sacks were filled, they needed to be tied or sealed securely, so the contents would not spill during transport. Workers used strong cords and knots to close the sacks tightly. Villages also depended on fay cart lantern holders fay, individuals who attached lanterns to carts travelling at night so drivers could see the road. This helped prevent accidents on dark village paths. Another interesting occupation was the fay barn ladder maker fay. Barns often required tall ladders for storing hay in upper lofts. Ladder makers built these structures from strong wood, so workers could safely climb while carrying heavy loads. Some villages had fay seed sorters, fay, people who carefully sorted seeds after harvest. Good seeds were saved for planting next season, while damaged or weak seeds were discarded. This careful sorting helped ensure successful crops. Another unusual job was the fayfield ditch cleaner fay. Ditches were dug along farmland to control water flow and prevent flooding. Over time, these ditches could fill with mud and plants. Cleaners removed debris so water could move properly. Medieval villages also relied on fay stable lantern lighters fay. Livestock barns sometimes required lighting at night, especially during calving or lambing seasons. Lantern lighters ensured that stable areas had enough light for workers to care for animals safely. Another curious profession was the fay hay fork maker. Hay forks were large tools used to move hay into barns or wagons. Craftsmen carved wooden handles and attached metal prongs to create strong farming tools. Villages sometimes had fay grain mill assistants fay, workers who helped operate the heavy millstones in windmills or water mills. They carried sacks, adjusted machinery, and ensured the grinding process worked smoothly. Another strange occupation involved rainwater barrel maintainers fay. Rainwater was sometimes collected in large barrels for washing or cleaning. These barrels required regular cleaning to prevent contamination. Some villages had festival lantern decorators, fay, individuals who decorated lanterns used during celebrations or religious events. Another interesting job was the fay wood chip collector, fay. After carpenters worked on building projects, wood chips were gathered and reused as fuel for cooking fires. Medieval communities also depended on Fey barn straw rangers Fey, workers who spread straw bedding for animals so they would remain warm and dry. Another unusual profession was the Fey grain cart balancer Fey. When carts were loaded with sacks of grain, someone had to ensure the weight was evenly distributed, so the cart would not tip during travel. Some villages had Fey stone marker painters Fey, individuals who painted boundary stones or important markers, so travellers could see them clearly. Another strange job involved Fey rope knot specialists. Fey. These workers knew how to tie strong knots used in fishing, farming, and cargo transport. Villages also relied on Fey barn door latchmakers Fey, craftsmen who produced wooden or metal latches used to secure barn doors. Another curious occupation was the Fey lantern wick maker Fey. Wicks were needed for oil lamps and lanterns. Workers twisted cotton or plant fibers into small cords that could absorb oil and produce steady flames. Some villages had Fey grain basket liners Fey, people who lined baskets with cloth or straw so small grains would not fall through gaps in the woven structure. Another unusual profession was the Fey cart handle carver Fey, someone who carved wooden handles for carts and wagons to make them easier to pull or steer. Medieval villages also depended on Fey mud road packers Fey workers, who packed soil and stones onto muddy roads to make them firmer for carts. Another interesting role was the Fey animal watering trough cleaner Fey, responsible for keeping the troughs used by livestock free from mud and algae. Some villages had Fey windmill sail repairers, Fey individuals, who repaired the cloth sails that captured wind energy to turn millstones. Another strange job involved Fey grain sack patchers Fey, workers who repaired holes in cloth sacks used for storing grain. Villages also relied on festival drum carriers, Fey people who transported large drums used during village celebrations. Another curious occupation was the Fey cart rope fastener Fey, responsible for tying ropes that secured cargo on wagons during long journeys. Some villages had firewood bundle sellers Fey, individuals who collected small bundles of wood and sold them to families who lacked their own supply. Another unusual profession was the Fey water bucket carrier Fey, someone who transported water from wells to households that could not collect it themselves. Medieval communities also depended on Fey grain loft sweepers Fey, workers who cleaned grain storage areas to prevent insects from spreading. Another interesting job was the Fey barn beam inspector Fey, who checked large wooden beams supporting barns and storage buildings. Some villages had Fey festival torch guards Fey, people who ensured torches used during celebrations did not start accidental fires. Another strange job involved Fey grain drying floor turners Fey, workers who turned grain regularly so it dried evenly. Villages also relied on Fey stone oven cleaners, Fey individuals responsible for cleaning large communal ovens used for baking bread. Finally, there were Fey pathway torch extinguishers, Fey workers who went through the village late at night, putting out torches and lanterns after events ended to prevent fires. All of these unusual occupations reveal how detailed and organized medieval village life truly was. Every small task, from maintaining wells and roads to preparing food and protecting crops, required someone with the right skills. Many of these jobs seem strange today because modern technology has replaced them, but in medieval times they were essential parts of daily life. Villages survived not because of a few important professions, but because of countless individuals performing small yet vital tasks that kept the entire community functioning. Medieval villages contained an incredible number of small and highly specific occupations that developed out of everyday needs, because life depended entirely on manual labor. Every tiny task often became someone's responsibility. These jobs might sound strange today, but for medieval villagers they were normal parts of daily life. The survival of the entire community depended on people carrying out these duties carefully and consistently. Unusual occupation was the Faywell bucket rope, untangler fay ropes. Used for drawing water from wells, often became twisted or tangled after repeated use. If the rope twisted too tightly, the bucket could spin, spill water, or even break the rope. Some villagers became skilled at fixing and untangling these ropes so that wells could continue to operate smoothly. Another strange job was the fay grain drying watcher fay. After harvest, grain had to be spread across large floors or mats so it could dry properly before being stored. If grain remained damp, it could quickly develop mold and become useless for food. The drying watcher carefully observed the grain and turned it frequently so air could circulate around it. Some villages also had fay cart axle oilers fay, individuals responsible for applying grease to cart axles. Without lubrication, wooden wheels produced loud squeaking sounds and wore down quickly. The oiler applied animal fat or other lubricants to keep carts moving smoothly. Another unusual occupation was the stable lantern guard. Since barns and stables were filled with dry straw, lanterns could easily cause fires. Lantern guards monitored the use of lighting inside stables to ensure flames did not come too close to flammable material. Medieval villages were filled with even more small and unusual occupations that existed simply because everyday life required constant attention to detail. Without machines, electricity, or organized services, every task, from maintaining tools to caring for animals, had to be done manually. Over time, certain people became known for handling specific tasks, turning them into regular roles within the community. These jobs might appear extremely minor today, but in medieval times they were necessary parts of village life. One such occupation was the fay grain basket carrier fay. During harvest season, farmers used woven baskets to transport grain from the fields to storage areas. Carrying these baskets repeatedly over long distances was exhausting work, so some villagers specialized in this labor. Another unusual role was the Faywell bucket stand maker fay. When buckets were pulled from wells, they needed a place to rest, so water could be poured into other containers. Craftsmen created simple wooden stands that supported the heavy buckets and prevented them from tipping over. Some villages also had fay barn door bar carvers fay, individuals who carved the thick wooden bars used to secure barn doors from the inside. These bars protected livestock and grain supplies from theft or wandering animals. Another curious occupation was the fay grain scoop repairer fay. Wooden scoops used in farming could crack or split after constant use. Repairers patched these tools so farmers did not need to replace them frequently. Medieval villages also relied on fay cart wheel wedge removers fay. When carts were parked on slopes, Wooden wedges were placed behind wheels to stop them from rolling. Before the cart moved again, someone had to remove these wedges quickly. Another strange job involved the Fey hay loft path clearer Fey inside barns. Narrow paths allowed workers to walk between large piles of hay. Someone had to keep these paths clear, so workers could move safely. Some villages had Fey well rope drying attendants, Fey individuals who hung damp well ropes in sunlight, so they would not rot. Another interesting profession was the Fey grain sack lifting partner Fey. Heavy sacks were often lifted by two people working together, and certain individuals became known for assisting with these lifts during busy seasons. Villages also depended on Fey animal tether rope knotters Fey, people skilled at tying secure knots when animals were tied near fields or barns. Another unusual occupation was the Fey cart plank nail hammerer, Fey someone who hammered loose nails back into cart boards after long journeys. Some villages had Fey barn straw pile patters Fey, workers who pressed straw down gently to make the piles compact and stable. Another strange job involved the Fey grain drying mat spreader Fey, someone responsible for laying out large mats before grain was placed on them. Medieval communities also relied on Fey waiter bucket shoulder carriers, Fey individuals who carried buckets using wooden shoulder poles to distribute weight evenly. Another curious profession was the Fey cart handle rope wrapper Fey, someone who wrapped ropes around handles to improve grip for drivers. Some villages had Fey grain storage door closers, Fey individuals who ensured storage rooms remained sealed against pests and moisture. Another unusual occupation was the Fey barn beam cobweb cleaner Fey, someone who removed cobwebs and dust from large wooden beams. Villages also relied on Fey cart lantern hook fixers, Fey craftsmen, who repaired small metal hooks used to hang lanterns. Another strange job involved the Fey grain sack tie replacer Fey, someone who replaced worn cords used to close sacks. Some villages had Fey hay wagon side support holders Fey, workers who held wooden boards in place while wagons were being loaded. Another interesting profession was the Fey well stone moss scraper Fey, someone who scraped moss from stones surrounding wells. Medieval communities also depended on Fey grain scoop stack arrangers, Fey, people who stacked scoops neatly in storage rooms. Another curious occupation was the Fey barn floor straw rake operator Fey, someone who used rakes to spread straw evenly across floors. Some villages had Fey cart cargo checker assistants, Fey workers who helped inspect loads before carts departed. Another unusual occupation was the Fey animal feeding bucket washer, Fey someone who cleaned buckets used to feed livestock. Villages also relied on Fey grain sack airing pole hangers Fey individuals who hung sacks over poles to dry. Another strange job involved the Fey cart wheel groove cleaner Fey, someone who cleaned dirt stuck between wheel spokes. Some villages had Fey festival torch stick straighteners, Fey, people who straightened wooden sticks used to hold torches. Another interesting profession was the Fey barn door rope puller, Fey, someone who helped close large heavy barn doors. Medieval communities also depended on Fey grain drying rake cleaners Fey, individuals who cleaned tools used during grain drying. Another curious occupation was the Fey cart axle wood splinter remover, Fey, someone who removed small splinters that could damage wheels. Some villages had Fey animal watering trough refilling helpers Fey, workers who assisted with filling large troughs. Another unusual occupation was the Fey well bucket rope, coil hanger Fey. Someone who hung ropes neatly after wells were closed for the night. Villages also relied on Fey hay fork handle sanders, Fey craftsmen who smoothed wooden handles. Another strange job involved the Fey grain storage shelf dust sweepers Fey, people who kept shelves clean. Some villages had Fey festival lantern wick cutters Fey, individuals who trimmed lantern wicks before events. Another interesting profession was the Fey cart cargo rope knot checker Fey, someone who checked knots before carts left the village. Medieval communities also depended on Fey barn ladder rung replacers Fey, workers who replaced broken ladder steps. Another curious occupation was the Fey grain shovel storage rack builder Fey, someone who built racks to store large tools. Some villages had Fey cart brake wedge collectors Fey, individuals who gathered wedges after carts departed. Another unusual occupation was the Fey animal pen gate peg hammerer, Fey someone who hammered wooden pegs to secure gates. Villages also relied on Fey grain sack dust shakers Fey, people who shook dust out of empty sacks. Another strange job involved the Fey well bucket spill sand spreader Fey, someone who spread sand to absorb water spills. Some villages had Fey cart lantern glass wipers Fey, individuals who cleaned soot from lantern surfaces. Another interesting profession was the Fey barn straw fork straightener Fey, someone who repaired bent prongs. Medieval communities also depended on Fey grain storage mat beaters Fey, workers who beat dust out of mats. Another curious occupation was the Fey animal feed scoop filler Fey, someone who filled scoops used to distribute grain. Some villages had Fey festival banner rope coilers Fey, individuals who coiled ropes after events. Another unusual occupation was the Fey evening cartwheel stopper Fey, someone who placed wedges behind parked carts. Villages also relied on Fey barn loft hay rake assistants Fey, workers who helped spread hay evenly. Another strange job involved the Fey grain sack lift signaller Fey, someone who gave signals when lifting heavy sacks. Some villages had Fey path lantern rope untanglers Fey, people who untangled ropes used during festivals. Another interesting profession was the Fey well lid hinge greaser, someone who oiled hinges so lids moved smoothly. Finally, villages also depended on Fey night barn lantern extinguishers, Fey individuals who walked through barns at night, putting out lanterns so that fires would not accidentally start while the village slept. All of these small and unusual occupations demonstrate how medieval village life depended on careful attention to countless tiny details. Each task, no matter how small, played a role in protecting food supplies, maintaining buildings, caring for animals, and ensuring the safety of the community. Although many of these roles might seem strange today, they existed because medieval villagers had to rely entirely on human labor and cooperation to keep their world functioning. Medieval villages still had many more small and peculiar roles that developed naturally from the constant needs of daily life. In a world without machines, electricity, or large organized systems, every simple activity required human effort. Because people depended on farming, animals, and handmade tools, the smallest maintenance tasks could become recognized duties within the community. These jobs might appear incredibly minor today, but they were necessary parts of medieval village life. Unnamed such unusual occupation was the Fey grain sack shoulder pad maker Fey. Carrying grain sacks across fields and storage areas could injure workers' shoulders, so some craftsmen created simple cloth or straw pads that made the loads easier to carry. Another curious job was the Fey-well bucket rim smoother Fey. Wooden buckets could develop rough edges after repeated use. Someone often sanded or scraped the rims so they would not splinter when people handled them. Some villages also had Fey barn latch peg whittlers, Fey individuals, who carved small wooden pegs used to secure barn doors and gates. Another unusual role was the Fey grain shovel rack keeper Fey. Grain shovels were large tools used frequently during harvest season. Someone organized them on racks so workers could quickly grab and return them. Medieval villages also relied on Fey cart wheel mud flingers, Fey workers, who knocked dried mud from wheels before carts entered storage sheds. Another strange job involved the Fey hay rope bundle tier Fey, someone responsible for tying ropes around bundles of hay before they were lifted into barns. Some villages had Fey grain sack pole lifters Fey, workers who used long poles to lift sacks onto high storage shelves. Medieval villages also had many other small and unusual occupations that existed simply because life required constant upkeep and organization. In a time when tools were handmade, roads were rough, and food supplies had to be carefully protected, even the smallest responsibilities could turn into regular duties carried out by certain villagers. These roles often went unnoticed in historical records, yet they helped maintain the rhythm of everyday life. One such unusual occupation was the Fey grain pile leveler Fey after harvest. Farmers brought grain into barns and storage houses where it was piled into large heaps. If the grain was unevenly stacked, it could trap moisture or collapse, so someone often spread and leveled the piles carefully. Another curious job was the Fey cart wheel stopper placer Fey. Whenever carts were parked on sloping ground, wooden blocks were placed behind the wheels so they would not roll away. This simple but important job prevented accidents in busy village areas. Some villages also had Fey barn straw corner packers, Fey individuals who pushed loose straw firmly into the corners of barns so the floor space remained organized and easier to clean. Another unusual role was the Fey grain basket handle wrapper Fey. Basket handles sometimes became rough and uncomfortable to hold, especially when carrying heavy loads. Wrapping them with cloth or leather made them easier to grip. Medieval villages also relied on Fey-well rope knot testers Fey. Each morning someone checked the knots attaching buckets to ropes to ensure they had not loosened overnight. Another strange job involved the Fey cart plank dust sweepers Fey. Before loading goods, workers swept dust and debris off the cart beds to keep sacks and goods clean. Some villages had Fey barn door wedge holders Fey, individuals responsible for placing wedges that kept large barn doors open during busy work hours. Another interesting profession was the Fey grain sack resting pole holders Fey. When workers lifted heavy sacks, they sometimes rested them briefly on wooden poles. Someone helped position these poles during lifting tasks. Villages also depended on Fey animal feeding scoop fillers Fey, individuals who filled wooden scoops with grain before distributing feed to animals. Another unusual occupation was the Fey cart lantern windshield adjuster. Fey someone who adjusted protective covers so lantern flames would not blow out while carts travelled. Some villages had fei fork handle, oilers fei, workers who rubbed oil into wooden handles to prevent cracking. Another strange job involved the fei grain drying mat turners fei, individuals who flipped large drying mats so both sides remained clean and dry. Medieval communities also relied on fei barn loft hay edge tappers fei, people who gently pressed hay along the edges of storage areas so it remained stable. Another curious profession was the fei well stone ring cleaner fei, someone who cleaned the circular stone edge surrounding the well. Some villages had fei cart rope knot retiers, fei individuals who retied loose knots before carts began long journeys. Another unusual occupation was the fei grain scoop hanging rack organizer fei, someone who arranged scoops neatly after harvest work. Villages also relied on fei barn straw rake tooth cleaners fei, workers who cleaned dirt stuck between rake teeth. Another strange job involved the fei grain sack floor marker fei, someone who drew lines on the floor to guide how sacks should be stacked. Some villages had fei cart axle wood chip removers fei, individuals who removed wood fragments from axles. Another interesting profession was the fei animal pen gate rope replacer fei, someone who replaced worn ropes used to close gates. Medieval communities also depended on fei grain drying shovel edge smoothers fei, craftsmen who smoothed shovel edges. Another curious occupation was the fei barn loft ladder rung checker fei, someone who inspected ladder steps for cracks. Some villages had fei festival torch, stand sand levelers fei, individuals who ensured the sand in torch stands remained even. Another unusual occupation was the fei cart lantern hook rope tie assistant fei, someone who helped secure lantern hooks properly. Villages also relied on fei grain basket stacking pole setters fei, workers who placed poles between stacked baskets to improve stability. Another strange job involved the fei well bucket spill mud scraper fei, someone who removed muddy buildup caused by spilled water. Some villages had fei barn straw fork tine straighteners fei, individuals who repaired bent fork prongs. Another interesting profession was the fei grain scoop drying rack cleaner fei, someone who cleaned racks used to dry tools. Medieval communities also depended on fei cart cargo wedge adjusters fei, workers who repositioned wedges securing loads. Another curious occupation was the fei animal trough water level checker fei, someone who ensured animals had enough water. Some villages had fei grain sackcloth flap folders fei, individuals who folded sack flaps neatly before tying. Another unusual occupation was the fei barn beam cobweb stick holder fei, someone who held long sticks used for cleaning high beams. Villages also relied on fei cart path stone scatterers fei, workers who scattered stones across muddy paths. Another strange job involved the fei grain drying rake handle tighteners fei, individuals who tightened loose handles. Some villages had fei welded handle oilers fei, people who applied oil so handles turned smoothly. Another interesting profession was the fei barn loft hay rake assistants fei, helpers who assisted in spreading hay. Medieval communities also depended on fei cart lantern soot cloth holders fei, workers who carried cloths for wiping lanterns. Another curious occupation was the fei grain sack stack corner adjuster fei, someone who fixed uneven corners in stack sacks. Some villages had fei animal tether peg rope winders, Fey individuals who wound ropes around pegs neatly. Another unusual occupation was the Fey-grain scoop-handle peg replacer Fey, someone who replaced small wooden pegs. Villages also relied on Fey barn straw floor ridge flatteners. Fey, workers who flattened raised ridges in straw bedding. Another strange job involved the Fey cart plank splinter picker Fey, someone who removed splinters from wood boards. Some villages had Fey-grain sack carrying strap menders Fey, individuals who repaired cloth carrying straps. Another interesting profession was the Feywell rope coil shelf builder Fey, someone who built shelves for storing rope coils. Medieval communities also depended on Fey cart cargo rope twist straighteners, Fey, workers who untwisted ropes. Another curious occupation was the Fey barn door hinge pin replacer Fey, someone who replaced worn hinge pins. Some villages had festival lantern pole aligners, Fey individuals who aligned poles along village streets. Another unusual occupation was the Fey-grain basket bottom patch stitcher Fey, someone who repaired basket bottoms. Villages also relied on Fey cart axle grease cloth holders, Fey, workers who carried cloth used during greasing. Another strange job involved the Fey barn loft dustpan carriers Fey, helpers who collected dust while others swept. Some villages had Fey-grain sack lift signal whistle blowers, Fey individuals who signaled lifting teams. Another interesting profession was the Feywell bucket rope tension adjuster, Fey, someone who adjusted rope tension. Finally, villages also depended on Fey night barn door bar setters, Fey individuals who walked through the village each night, placing wooden bars across barn doors to secure them before everyone slept. All of these additional roles demonstrate just how incredibly detailed medieval village life truly was. Every part of daily survival, from maintaining tools and storing food to caring for animals and protecting buildings, required attention. Because machines and modern systems did not exist, people filled countless small roles that kept their communities functioning. These seemingly minor occupations remind us that the stability of medieval life depended on many individuals performing small but essential tasks every single day. Medieval villages continued to rely on countless other small and unusual occupations that emerged from the simple realities of everyday life. In a time before modern technology, even the smallest activities required manual effort and careful coordination. Food had to be protected, animals cared for, tools maintained, and buildings constantly repaired. Because these responsibilities were ongoing, certain villagers often became known for performing particular tasks regularly, turning them into informal professions that helped the entire community function smoothly. One such occupation was the Fey-grain sack turner Fady. When sacks of grain were stored in barns for long periods, they needed to be turned occasionally, so the grain inside would not settle unevenly or trap moisture. Someone often walked through the storage areas, turning the sacks carefully to keep the grain in good condition. Another curious job was the Fey cart wheel groove picker Fey mud, straw, and small stones often became stuck between the grooves of wooden wheels. Workers used wooden sticks or simple tools to remove this build-up so the wheels would roll more smoothly. Some villages also had Fey barn straw bundle arrangers Fey, individuals who organized bundles of straw by size, so they could be used easily when bedding needed to be replaced for animals. Another unusual role was the Fey well rope coil sorter Fey. When ropes were removed from wells for drying or replacement, they were coiled and stored. Someone had to organize these coils so the ropes did not tangle. Medieval villages also relied on Fey-grained scoop wood crack fillers, Fey craftsmen who filled small cracks in wooden scoops using resin or wax to extend their life. Another strange job involved the Fey cart lantern soot scraper Fey. Someone who scraped soot from lantern tops so smoke could escape properly. Medieval villages also had many other small and unusual occupations that existed simply because life required constant upkeep and organization. In a time when tools were handmade, roads were rough, and food supplies had to be carefully protected. Even the smallest responsibilities could turn into regular duties carried out by certain villagers. These roles often went unnoticed in historical records, yet they helped maintain the rhythm of everyday life. One such unusual occupation was the Fey grain pile leveler Fey after harvest. Farmers brought grain into barns and storage houses, where it was piled into large heaps. If the grain was unevenly stacked, it could trap moisture or collapse. So someone often spread and leveled the piles carefully. Another curious job was the Fey cart wheel stopper placer Fey. Whenever carts were parked on sloping ground, wooden blocks were placed behind the wheels so they would not roll away. This simple but important job prevented accidents in busy village areas. Some villages also had Fey barn straw corner packers, Fey individuals who pushed loose straw firmly into the corners of barns so the floor space remained organized and easier to clean. Another unusual role was the Fey grain basket handle wrapper Fey. Basket handles sometimes became rough and uncomfortable to hold, especially when carrying heavy loads. Wrapping them with cloth or leather made them easier to grip. Medieval villages also relied on Fey well rope knot testers Fey. Each morning someone checked the knots attaching buckets to ropes to ensure they had not loosened overnight. Another strange job involved the Fey cart plank dust sweepers Fey before loading goods. Workers swept dust and debris off the cart beds to keep sacks and goods clean. Some villages had Fey barn door wedge holders Fey, individuals responsible for placing wedges that kept large barn doors open during busy work hours. Another interesting profession was the Fey grain sack resting pole holders Fey. When workers lifted heavy sacks, they sometimes rested them briefly on wooden poles. Someone helped position these poles during lifting tasks. Villages also depended on Fey animal feeding scoop fillers, Fey individuals who filled wooden scoops with grain before distributing feed to animals. Another unusual occupation was the Fey cart lantern windshield adjuster Fey, someone who adjusted protective covers so lantern flames would not blow out while carts travelled. Some villages had Fey hay fork handle oilers Fey, workers who rubbed oil into wooden handles to prevent cracking. Another strange job involved the Fey grain drying mat turners Fey, individuals who flipped large drying mats so both sides remained clean and dry. Medieval communities also relied on Fey barn loft hay edge tappers Fey, people who gently pressed hay along the edges of storage areas so it remained stable. Another curious profession was the Fey well stone ring cleaner Fey, someone who cleaned the circular stone edge surrounding the well. Some villages had Fey cart rope knot retiers, Fey individuals who retied loose knots before carts began long journeys. Another unusual occupation was the Fey grain scoop hanging rack organizer Fey, someone who arranged scoops neatly after harvest work. Villages also relied on Fey barn straw rake tooth cleaners, Fey workers who cleaned dirt stuck between rake teeth. Another strange job involved the Fey grain sack floor marker. Fey, someone who drew lines on the floor to guide how sacks should be stacked. Some villages had Fey cart axle wood chip removers, Fey. Individuals who removed wood fragments from axles. Another interesting profession was the Fey animal pen gate rope replacer. Fey, someone who replaced worn ropes used to close gates. Medieval communities also depended on Fey grain drying shovel edge smoothers. Fey craftsmen who smoothed shovel edges. Another curious occupation was the Fey barn loft ladder rung checker Fey, someone who inspected ladder steps for cracks. Some villages had Fey festival torch stand sand levelers Fey, individuals who ensured the sand in torch stands remained even. Another unusual occupation was the Fey cart lantern hook rope tie assistant face, someone who helped secure lantern hooks properly. Villages also relied on Fey grain basket stacking pole setters Fey, workers who placed poles between stacked baskets to improve stability. Another strange job involved the Feywell bucket spill mud scraper Fey, someone who removed muddy build-up caused by spilled water. Some villages had Fey barn straw fork tine straighteners Fey, individuals who repaired bent fork prongs. Another interesting profession was the Fey grain scoop drying rack cleaner Fey, someone who cleaned racks used to dry tools. Medieval communities also depended on Fey cart cargo wedge adjusters, Fey workers who repositioned wedges securing loads. Another curious occupation was the Fey animal trough water level checker Fey, someone who ensured animals had enough water. Some villages had Fey grain sackcloth flap folders Fey, individuals who folded sack flaps neatly before tying. Another unusual occupation was the Fey barn beam cobweb stick holder Fey, someone who held long sticks used for cleaning high beams. Villages also relied on Fey cart path stone scatterers Fey, workers who scattered stones across muddy paths. Another strange job involved the Fey grain drying rake handle tighteners Fey, individuals who tightened loose handles. Some villages had Feywell lid handle oilers Fey, people who applied oil so handles turned smoothly. Another interesting profession was the Fey barn loft hay rake assistants Fey, helpers who assisted in spreading hay. Medieval communities also depended on Fey cart lanterns soot cloth holders Fey, workers who carried cloths for wiping lanterns. Another curious occupation was the Fey grain sack stack corner adjuster Fey, someone who fixed uneven corners in stacked sacks. Some villages had Fey animal tether peg rope wenders, Fey individuals who wound ropes around pegs neatly. Another unusual occupation was the Fey grain scoop handle peg replacer Fey, someone who replaced small wooden pegs. Villages also relied on Fey barn straw floor ridge flatteners Fey, workers who flattened raised ridges in straw bedding. Another strange job involved the Fey cart plank splinter picker Fey, someone who removed splinters from wood boards. Some villages had Fey grain sack carrying strap menders Fey, individuals who repaired cloth carrying straps. Another interesting profession was the Feywell rope coil shelf builder Fey, someone who built shelves for storing rope coils. Medieval communities also depended on Fey cart cargo rope, twist straighteners Fey, workers who untwisted ropes. Another curious occupation was the Fey barn door hinge pin replacer Fey, someone who replaced worn hinge pins. Some villages had festival lantern pole aligners Fey, individuals who aligned poles along village streets. Another unusual occupation was the Fey grain basket bottom patch stitcher Fey, someone who repaired basket bottoms. Villages also relied on Fey cart axle grease cloth holders Fey, workers who carried cloth used during greasing. Another strange job involved the Fey barn loft dustpan carriers Fey, helpers who collected dust while others swept. Some villages had Fey grain sack lift signal whistle blowers, Fey individuals who signaled lifting teams. Another interesting profession was the Fey well bucket rope tension adjuster Fey, someone who adjusted rope tension. Finally, villages also depended on Fey night barn door bar setters Fey, individuals who walked through the village each night placing wooden bars across barn doors to secure them before everyone slept. All of these additional roles demonstrate just how incredibly detailed medieval village life truly was. Every part of daily survival, from maintaining tools and storing food to caring for animals and protecting buildings, required attention. Because machines and modern systems did not exist, people filled countless small roles that kept their communities functioning. These seemingly minor occupations remind us that the stability of medieval life depended on many individuals performing small but essential tasks every single day. Medieval villages continued to rely on countless other small and unusual occupations that emerged from the simple realities of everyday life. In a time before modern technology, even the smallest activities required manual effort and careful coordination. Food had to be protected, animals cared for, tools maintained, and buildings constantly repaired. Because these responsibilities were ongoing, certain villages often became known for performing particular tasks regularly, turning them into informal professions that helped the entire community function smoothly. One such occupation was the Fey grain sack turner Fey, when sacks of grain were stored in barns for long periods. They needed to be turned occasionally so the grain inside would not settle unevenly or trap moisture. Someone often walked through the storage areas, turning the sacks carefully to keep the grain in good condition. Another curious job was the Fey cart wheel groove picker Fey mud. Straw and small stones often became stuck between the grooves of wooden wheels. Workers used wooden sticks or simple tools to remove this build-up, so the wheels would roll more smoothly. Some villages also had Fey barn straw bundle arrangers, Fey individuals who organized bundles of straw by size, so they could be used easily when bedding needed to be replaced for animals. Another unusual role was the Fey well rope coil sorter Fey. When ropes were removed from wells for drying or replacement, they were coiled and stored. Someone had to organize these coils so the ropes did not tangle. Medieval villages also relied on Fey grain scoop wood crack fillers, Fey craftsmen who filled small cracks in wooden scoops using resin or wax to extend their life. Another strange job involved the Fey cart lantern soot scraper Fey, someone who scraped soot from lantern tops so smoke could escape properly.